One of the most important themes in the history of the North Atlantic slave trade is the fact that it was almost exclusively a Jewish practice. Why is this so important? Well, if you are a white American whose family roots can be traced back to colonial America, then most likely no one in your family tree had anything to do with the slave trade, slavery, owned slaves, and most likely probably very rarely even laid eyes upon a black man at all during the 16, 17, and even early 1800s. This would be because most likely your ancestors were farmers or tradesmen, and more importantly, Christian, who lived in a community of similar people living similar lifestyles. Consumed by daily chores, chopping wood, milking cows, digging wells, setting animal traps, tilling the land, just to name a few. 90% of their life revolved around foraging for food, preparation of food, and storage of food. All of this while always being cautious of, wild animals such as wolves or bears and unfriendly Native American tribes who, would scalp you and kidnap your wives or daughters. Not much white privilege in this scenario because this is the truth. An unbiased account of the North Atlantic slave trade and who was truly behind it. In this postmodern clown world that we currently live in today, where some black folks feel like they deserve reparations for something that your ancestors are being accused of, then I think it's important to present the facts. And the facts are most likely you can hold your head up proudly knowing that there is a 9 out of 10 chance that none of your ancestors had anything to do with slavery at all. However, if those demanding reparations want to know who to hold accountable, then this information will benefit you as well. I think if we are going to live in a fair world, then it is only right that the same group who has demanded reparations from Germany and elsewhere for alleged crimes in World War II, that they should accept responsibility for their past inhumanities and should accept responsibility as well. Jews should accept their dominant and almost exclusive role in the slave trade and happily put their money into the African American community. I believe that would be the honorable thing to do instead of allowing the Gentile Christian descended white man of European stock take responsibility for something they had very little or nothing to do with at all. Here I present undisputed facts from academic sources, and particularly African American scholars and Jewish sources as well. The second part of this presentation honors African Americans by telling the truth about the Civil War as opposed to the mainstream liberal lies that dishonor the countless black Confederates who died defending the South, because they are pushing some nonsense about slavery being the cause of this horrible war. Nothing can be more racist and disrespectful than spreading this lie, knowingly leaving out those Confederates of color. It's time to stop using history as a political weapon to tear down statues, promote white guilt culture, and falsely accusing one group of something they most likely had no part in, while completely deflecting away from who is truly responsible for those past mistakes. History is a chronicle of events that we can all benefit from, if it's told honestly. Turning it into a Soviet-style political weapon only hurts all of us in the end. It's time for honest history to be told and never forgotten. Let us proceed.
Jews had in fact been involved not only in the African slave trade, but they had been involved in a variety of other slave trades too for a very long period of time. Apparently they had actually dominated slavery and the slave trade in medieval times. On the plane on the way here a couple of days ago, I was rereading a dissertation, a PhD dissertation from 1977 by a man called Harold D. Brackman, who is a functionary of the Simon Wiesenthal Center of all places. And he did a PhD dissertation detailing black-Jewish relations from ancient times up to 1900. And he actually mentions in his dissertation, he acknowledges the fact that Jews were the principal slave traders in the world for several hundred years, although in typical fashion he puts a very interesting spin on it. He acknowledges, as I guess he has to, The Jews were the major slave traders in the world, trading slaves everywhere from Russia to Western Europe, to India, to China. But he says that they dominated the world trade only for a few hundred years, only. He says they were the main slave traders from the 8th century to the 12th century, but that was no big thing. It was only a few hundred years.
And who were the owners of these slave ships? Who were the biggest slavers in the 16th century? The Ashkenazi were the biggest slavers in the 16th and 17th century, going into the 18th century. You see, Ashkenazi slaving was huge. This is from, I have to be careful when I say this, so my sources, it's always best to go with Jewish sources, right? Because you just trod on a bunch of toes, so we'll go with the Jewish sources. There's a ton of sources out there, but I'll stick with the Jewish ones because that's just safer. The Jewish scholar Jonathan Shorshak says this: Jewish merchants routinely possessed enormous numbers of slaves temporarily before selling them off. If a slave auction fell on a Jewish festival, it was postponed due to lack of buyers and sellers. The Jews of Suriname gave their slave plantations Hebrew names such as Machanaim, Nachamu, and Goshen. Rabbi Herbert Bloom adds that the slave trade was one of the most important Jewish activities. Jewish slaving is in fact confirmed by the Jewish Encyclopedia.
Yes, it is true, as we now know, that there was a higher per capita ownership of slaves in the United States of America by Jews than by white Gentiles. We now know from the 1830 census of the US of A that something like 75% of Jewish households own slaves, as opposed to just 30-odd% for the white population as a whole. All of this information is contained in the secret relationship between blacks and Jews. And all of this information is based on the work of Jewish historians. So how come that we have a situation, an amazing situation developing here, where the Jewish leadership in this country is trying to deny the undeniable? And the only reason why the Jewish leadership has been able to place itself into this untenable and indefensible position, it seems to me, is because they have become drunk with power. They have gotten into the habit of easy victories over our people. Professor Clark said no more easy victories. They have won some easy victories in the past, and they have become so drunk with the power coming out of those easy victories, and have become so arrogant and so conceited that they have come to the point now where they believe that they can in fact defend the indefensible. The Jeffries case has shown that the time has come to an end, that from now on they will be forced to deal on an intellectual level with an aroused black community, and once we force them to deal on an intellectual level, the Jeffries case has shown, and I hope that my case will show, that they cannot win.
The story of the slaves in America begins with Christopher Columbus. His voyage to America was not financed by Queen Isabella, but by Louis de Santiago, who advanced the sum of 17,000 ducats, about 5,000 pounds today, equal to 50,000 pounds, to finance the voyage, which began on August 3rd, 1492. Columbus was accompanied by 5 Marranos, Jews who had forsworn their religion and supposedly became Catholics. Louis de Torre, interpreter, Marco, the surgeon, Bemal, the physician, Alonso de la Calle, and Gabriel Sanchez. The reference is The International Jew by Henry Ford. Gabriel Sanchez, abetted by the other 4 Jews, sold Columbus on the idea of capturing 500 Indians and selling them as slaves in Seville, Spain, which was done. Columbus did not receive any of the money from the sale of the slaves, but he became the victim of a conspiracy fostered by Bemal, the ship's doctor. He, Columbus, suffered injustice and imprisonment as his reward, betrayed by the 5 Marranos, or Jews, whom he had trusted and helped. This, ironically, was the beginning of slavery in the Americas. The source is Adventures of an African Slaver, published in 1928, page 11. The Jews were expelled from Spain on August 2nd, 1492, and from Portugal in 1497. Many of these Jews immigrated to Holland, where they set up the Dutch West Indies Company to exploit the New World. In 1654, the first Jew, Jacob Bar Simpson, immigrated from Holland to New Amsterdam, or New York. And in the next decade, many more followed him, settling along the East Coast, principally in New Amsterdam and Newport, Rhode Island. They were prevented by ordinances issued by Governor Peter Stuyvesant from engaging in the domestic economy, so they quickly discovered that the territory inhabited by the Indians would be a fertile field. There were no laws preventing the Jews from trading with the Indians. The first Jew to begin trading with the Indians was Hyman Levy, who imported cheap glass beads, textiles, earrings, armbands, and other cheap adornments from Holland, which were traded for valuable fur pelts. Hyman Levy was soon joined by Jews Nicholas Lowe and Joseph Simon. Lowe conceived the idea of trading rum and whiskey to the Indians and set up a distillery in Newport, where these two liquors were produced. Within a short time, there were 22 distilleries in Newport, all of them owned by Jews, manufacturing and distributing firewater. The story of the debauching of the Indians with its resultant massacres of the early settlers is a dramatic story in itself. It is essential to comprehend the seaport of Newport. It is important in order to recognize the Jewish share in the slave commerce. There was a period when it was commonly referred to as, quote, the Jewish Newport World Center of Slave Commerce, unquote. Altogether at this time, there were in North America 6 Jewish communities: Newport, Charleston, New York, Philadelphia, Richmond, and Savannah. There were also many other Jews scattered over the entire East Coast. Although New York held first place in the settlers of Jews in North America, Newport held second place. New York was also the main source of kosher meat, supplying the North American settlements, then the West Indies, and also South America. Now Newport took over. Newport also became the great trade harbor of the East Coast of North America. There, vessels from other ports met to exchange commodities. Newport, as previously mentioned, represented the foremost place in the commerce of rum, whiskey, and liquor dealings. And to include, it finally became the main center of slave dealings. It was from this port that the ships left on their way across the ocean to gather their black human cargo and then derive great sums of money in exchange for them. An authentic contemporary report based on authority indicates that of 128 slave ships, for instance, unloaded in Charleston within 1 year, their cargo, 120 of these were undersigned by Jews from Newport and Charleston by their own name. About the rest of them, one can surmise, although they were entered as Boston, Norfolk, and Baltimore. Their real owners were similarly the Jewish slave dealers from Newport and Charleston. One is able to assess the Jewish share in the entire dealings of Newport if one considers the undertaking of a lone Jew, Portuguese Aaron Lopez, who plays an important part in the overall story of the Jews and slavery. Concerning the entire commerce of the colonies and the later state of Rhode Island, which included Newport, bills of lading, concessions, receipts, and port clearances carried the signature name of Jew Aaron Lopez. This also took place during the years 1726 to 1774. He had, therefore, more than 50% of all dealings under his personal control for almost 50 years. Aside from that, there were other ships which he owned, but sailed under other names. In the year 1749, the first Masonic Lodge was established. 90% of the members of this first lodge, 14 all told, were Jews, and one knows that only so-called prominent individuals were accepted. 20 years later, the second Masonic